The room didn't explode when the words were said. There was no dramatic gasp, no instant headline siren, no breaking news banner flashing red across television screens. It happened in that subtle way political earthquakes often do. A sentence dropped into the air, sharp but controlled, wrapped in familiar cadence. And yet buried inside that moment was something most people didn't catch. Not at first. Not in the clip that went viral. Not in the shouting matches that followed. It was what wasn't emphasized, what wasn't dissected, what wasn't fully understood, until now. When Donald Trump speaks, the world listens, supporters with anticipation, critics with scrutiny. That's not opinion. It's political gravity. The weight of his words carries differently because of who he is and what he represents. So when he referenced Ilhan Omar in that speech, not just by name, but by framing, tone, and choice of emphasis, it wasn't a casual aside. It was deliberate, calculated, and layered. The crowd reacted the way crowds do at rallies. Waves of applause, bursts of approval, a rhythm of call and response energy. But beyond the surface theatrics, there was something more strategic unfolding. Trump didn't just criticize policy. He didn't simply revisit past controversies. He did something far more surgical. He reframed the narrative. For years, the political tension between Trump and Omar has symbolized a larger ideological divide in American politics. On one side, a nationalist, America First philosophy. On the other, a progressive, globally conscious approach that challenges traditional structures. Their clashes have been public, intense, and deeply polarizing, but this moment was different. This time, the language was sharper and yet more restrained. The implication was heavier, yet less obvious. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't need to. Instead, he positioned the contrast in values as a question of loyalty versus criticism, of identity versus ideology. And that's where most viewers missed the turning point, because the statement wasn't just about Ilhan Omar, it was about drawing a line, one that forces the audience to choose a side without explicitly telling them to. That's the power of political framing. It plants a seed rather than throws a punch. To understand the weight of this moment, you have to step back. Donald Trump has always communicated in a way that bypasses traditional filters. His style is direct, often provocative, but rarely accidental. Every phrase carries an audience in mind. Every pause holds intention. When he invokes a name like Ilhan Omar's, he's not merely responding to a tweet or a policy disagreement. He's signaling to a broader narrative about what he believes America should be and what he believes it should resist becoming. And here's the part few commentators fully explored: the emotional architecture behind the statement. Politics isn't just policy, it's psychology, it's identity, it's belonging. When Trump framed his remarks the way he did, he tapped into a sentiment that runs deeper than partisan lines. The fear of cultural shift, the anxiety of change, the instinct to protect tradition. Whether one agrees or disagrees, the emotional trigger was intentional. It wasn't about debating legislation. It was about defining what American means in the current era. Ilhan Omar, as a Somali-American congresswoman with outspoken progressive views, represents a powerful counter-narrative. Her political identity challenges long-standing assumptions about who shapes American policy and how. So when Trump addressed her, he wasn't just confronting an individual, he was confronting a symbol. But there's another layer, one that became clearer when Bill Clinton's name surfaced in parallel conversations about the broader political climate. Bill Clinton once mastered the art of triangulation, positioning himself between ideological extremes to appeal to the center. He understood tone, he understood timing, he understood that sometimes what you imply is more powerful than what you declare. In contrast, Trump thrives on bold clarity and emotional intensity. Yet in this particular moment, there was an echo of strategic subtlety that even seasoned observers didn't expect. Instead of escalating the rhetoric, he distilled it. Instead of amplifying outrage, he framed contrast. That shift matters because it signals evolution. Political messaging evolves when leaders sense the stakes are changing. The 24-hour news cycle is louder than ever. Social media amplifies fragments out of context, and audiences are more fragmented than at any point in modern history. To break through that noise, a message must be layered enough to resonate across different psychological triggers. Trump's statement did exactly that. For his base, it reinforced long-held concerns about national direction and cultural identity. For moderates, it raised questions about governance and representation without overt aggression. And for critics, it reignited debate about tone and division. In one sentence, he activated three audiences simultaneously. That's not accidental, that's strategic communication. What most people don't realize is that high-level political messaging often operates like chess. You don't just move a piece, you anticipate reactions 5 moves ahead. By invoking Ilhan Omar in that particular framing, Trump positioned himself within a larger narrative arc about strength, national interest, and ideological contrast heading into a pivotal political season. And here's where the deeper analysis begins. Every major political figure eventually becomes more than an individual. They become a proxy for broader cultural tensions. Trump represents disruption to traditional political norms. Omar represents disruption to traditional demographic and ideological norms. Their public exchanges symbolize a clash not just of policies, but of identities. When Trump made that remark, he wasn't escalating the feud, he was redefining it. Instead of centering on personality conflict, he shifted toward principle, at least in presentation. That subtle pivot allowed him to frame the debate as one about values rather than individuals. And values debates resonate longer. Bill Clinton once said that politics is about building bridges to tomorrow. Whether one agrees with his record or not, he understood narrative arcs. He understood that the most effective political messages don't just attack opponents, they paint a picture of an alternative future. Trump's comment, in its own way, attempted to do that. By contrasting his vision of America with what he associates with Omar's ideology, he drew a directional map. The reaction online was immediate but predictable. Clips trimmed to seconds, captions sharpened for maximum engagement, commentary divided along familiar lines, but the deeper message required more than a headline to unpack. It required context. Ilhan Omar has often framed her political mission around systemic reform, social justice, and global cooperation. Trump has consistently framed his around sovereignty, economic nationalism, and traditional strength. When those philosophies collide, it's not simply debate, it's narrative warfare. And in narrative warfare, tone is ammunition. What made this moment different wasn't the clash itself, it was the delivery, the measured pace, the absence of overt hostility, the calm intensity. It created space for interpretation, and interpretation drives conversation. The most powerful political statements are the ones that linger, the ones that replay in minds days later, the ones that make supporters nod quietly and critics pause before responding. This was one of those moments. But to fully understand its significance, you have to consider timing. America is in a phase of heightened polarization. Trust in institutions is fluctuating. Economic anxieties intersect with cultural debates. In such an environment, symbolic confrontations carry amplified weight. By referencing Omar, Trump tapped into ongoing debates about immigration, foreign policy, and national identity without diving into granular policy details. He kept it emotional. And emotion travels faster than policy analysis ever will. Some observers saw it as another example of partisan rhetoric. Others viewed it as a calculated reminder of ideological stakes. But what many missed was the strategic restraint. Instead of delivering a barrage of criticisms, he delivered a pointed contrast and let the audience fill in the rest. That's powerful communication. It shifts responsibility of interpretation to the listener. It invites them to connect dots themselves. And when people feel like they've reached a conclusion independently, that conclusion sticks stronger. Meanwhile, Bill Clinton's legacy hovers over discussions of modern political communication because he represents an era where bipartisan negotiation was more visible, where messaging often sought middle ground. Comparing eras highlights how dramatically the communication landscape has changed. Today, clarity and conviction often outperform compromise in the arena of viral attention. Trump understands virality. But in this moment, he also demonstrated discipline, the discipline to say less and imply more. And that's why the statement matters beyond its surface reading. It signals that political messaging in the current cycle may be entering a new phase, one where contrast remains sharp, but presentation becomes more controlled, one where emotional triggers are activated without overt escalation, one where narrative framing does the heavy lifting. For Ilhan Omar, the challenge becomes how to respond within that framing. Do you escalate? Do you pivot? Do you ignore? Each response carries strategic consequences because when you're placed within someone else's narrative, reclaiming your own requires precision. This isn't just about two political figures, it's about the evolving psychology of American discourse. Voters today are not just evaluating policies, they're evaluating authenticity, strength, clarity, and cultural alignment. A single statement can reinforce months of positioning. It can signal direction without detailing a roadmap. That's what happened here. Most people heard the words. Fewer analyzed the architecture beneath them. And almost no one paused long enough to ask why the tone felt different. But tone is everything. It determines whether a message inflames or influences, whether it alienates or consolidates, whether it becomes a fleeting headline or a strategic marker in a larger campaign narrative. Trump's remark about Ilhan Omar was not random. It was not impulsive. It was a reminder, subtle yet firm, of the ideological fault lines shaping the next political chapter. And as the conversation continues, as pundits debate and social media fragments spin, one thing becomes clear. Sometimes the most powerful political shifts don't announce themselves with fireworks. They arrive in measured sentences, carrying implications that unfold slowly. Most people didn't realize what was said in that moment. But as context builds and strategy becomes clearer, the significance becomes harder to ignore. And this is only the beginning. Because what happens next, how narratives evolve, how responses are crafted, how voters interpret these signals, will determine whether that sentence becomes just another clip or a defining pivot in modern political discourse. The aftermath of a political statement often reveals more than the statement itself. In the hours following Trump's remark, the digital landscape fractured into familiar camps. Supporters clipped the most resonant lines, pairing them with triumphant captions. Critics extracted phrases to highlight perceived undertones. Cable panels convened, social feeds ignited. But beneath the noise, something quieter was happening, something strategic. Political influence is rarely about the immediate reaction. It's about narrative endurance. Will this moment fade within the churn of daily headlines, or will it embed itself into the broader storyline shaping the election cycle? That depends on how effectively each side leverages it. Trump's team understands momentum. Momentum is not built solely through policy announcements. It's sustained through symbolic clashes that reinforce brand identity. For years, Trump's political brand has centered on strength, confrontation, and clarity of stance. Yet in this moment, the clarity came without overt confrontation. That evolution signals adaptability. Adaptability matters in a political environment where audiences are fatigued by constant outrage. There's a threshold beyond which escalation loses impact. By moderating tone while preserving contrast, Trump demonstrated awareness of that threshold. Ilhan Omar, meanwhile, occupies a unique position within the Democratic coalition. As a member of the progressive wing, her voice carries influence among younger voters and activists who prioritize systemic reform. Any direct or indirect critique of her becomes amplified within those networks. That amplification can mobilize supporters just as easily as it energizes opposition. This dynamic creates a paradox. When one political figure references another with high symbolic weight, both gain visibility. The question becomes who benefits more from the exchange. Historically, moments of ideological clash have defined political eras. Think of how rhetoric shaped perceptions during the Clinton years when Bill Clinton navigated a rapidly changing post-Cold War landscape. His ability to project stability amid cultural shifts earned him political capital. Today's environment is far more fragmented, yet the principle remains. Messaging must balance conviction with control. Trump's remarks suggested an attempt to refine that balance. Critics argue that any reference to a polarizing figure risks deepening division. Supporters counter that drawing sharp ideological contrasts is essential for clarity. Both perspectives hold elements of truth. But the deeper question is not whether division exists, it's how leaders choose to channel it. Channeling division into a broader narrative of direction is different from amplifying it for spectacle. The former seeks consolidation, the latter seeks reaction. In this instance, the framing leaned toward consolidation. By positioning his comment within a broader argument about national direction, Trump invited listeners to view the exchange not as personal conflict, but as ideological differentiation. That shift reframes the stakes. It suggests that the debate is not about personalities, but about competing visions for America's future. Vision is powerful currency in politics. It transforms abstract policy disagreements into emotionally resonant choices. It answers the unspoken voter question, where are we headed? The effectiveness of Trump's statement lies in its ability to imply an answer without detailing one explicitly. It suggests that under his leadership, certain values would be prioritized: sovereignty, strength, traditional frameworks. By referencing Omar as a counterpoint, he sharpened that implication. The subtlety allowed supporters to project their own interpretations onto the message, and projection strengthens attachment. Meanwhile, opponents faced a strategic dilemma. respond too aggressively, and risk validating the framing. Ignore it and allow it to linger unanswered. Crafting the optimal response requires precision, acknowledging disagreement without reinforcing the original narrative. This is where modern political communication becomes a psychological chessboard. Every public statement triggers anticipation of reaction. Every reaction triggers recalibration. The interplay shapes momentum. Bill Clinton once demonstrated mastery in navigating backlash by absorbing criticism, reframing it, and redirecting focus toward policy achievements. That style relied on controlling tempo. Trump's style traditionally relies on accelerating tempo. Yet here the tempo slowed, just slightly, enough to create space for reflection rather than eruption. That subtle tempo shift may indicate strategic recalibration for a broader electorate. As election cycles intensify, candidates often adjust messaging to appeal beyond core supporters. The tone becomes more measured, the contrasts more value-driven than personality-driven. If that's the case, this moment could represent an inflection point. Consider the broader political climate. Economic concerns intersect with cultural debates. International tensions shape domestic discourse. Voters crave stability but demand authenticity. Navigating that complexity requires more than slogans. It requires layered communication. Trump's remark about Ilhan Omar, when viewed through that lens, appears less like a spontaneous critique and more like a calculated reinforcement of ideological contrast within a refined delivery system. The question then becomes, will voters interpret it that way? Interpretation depends on trust. Trust shapes how messages are received. For those who already trust Trump's leadership, the statement likely reinforced confidence. For those skeptical, it may have reinforced concerns about polarization. For undecided voters, the tone, more than the content, may influence perception. Tone communicates intent. Intent influences credibility. Credibility influences votes. This cascading chain underscores why even seemingly simple remarks matter. Ilhan Omar's political narrative centers on challenging entrenched systems. Trump's narrative centers on defending what he views as foundational principles. When those narratives intersect publicly, they create a symbolic crossroads for voters evaluating direction. Symbolism often outweighs specifics in shaping public memory. Years from now, few will recall the exact phrasing of the statement, but they may remember the sense of contrast it conveyed, the feeling that a line was drawn, calmly yet firmly. That feeling is what campaigns aim to cultivate. Campaigns are not just battles over facts. They are contests over emotion, perception, and identity alignment. They seek to create moments that crystallize broader themes. This may have been one of those moments, and yet nothing in politics is static. The impact of this statement will depend on subsequent developments, policy proposals, debates, economic indicators, global events. A single remark can spark momentum, but sustaining it requires consistent reinforcement. Trump has historically excelled at sustaining narrative energy. Whether through rallies, interviews, or social media engagement, he maintains visibility. The key question is whether this refined tone persists or gives way to more familiar intensity. For Ilhan Omar and her allies, the response strategy will likely emphasize policy substance and broader coalition building. By focusing on legislative priorities, they can shift attention from symbolic clashes to tangible outcomes. In that sense, the exchange becomes a microcosm of a larger strategic contest: symbolism versus substance, identity versus policy detail, emotional resonance versus pragmatic governance. But the dichotomy may be false. Effective political leadership often requires both. Bill Clinton's era demonstrated that charismatic communication paired with policy maneuvering can sustain broad appeal. Trump's era demonstrates that unfiltered authenticity can mobilize fervent loyalty. The current political landscape demands a hybrid: authenticity with discipline, conviction with control. This statement hinted at that hybrid. It suggested that contrast need not always come wrapped in explosive rhetoric. It can arrive in measured cadence, allowing the audience to draw conclusions organically. Organic conclusions feel owned by the listener. Ownership deepens commitment, and commitment drives turnout. As analysts dissect the words and commentators debate implications, the real impact unfolds quietly among voters absorbing the tone. Some will feel affirmed, others unsettled. Many will feel both, a complex blend of recognition and concern that defines modern political engagement. That complexity is the reality of contemporary democracy. No single narrative dominates unchallenged. Every message competes within an ecosystem of counter messages. In that environment, subtlety can cut through noise more effectively than volume. Most people didn't realize what Trump just said to Ilhan Omar because they were listening for fireworks. They expected a clash. Instead, they received a contrast, deliberate, restrained, and strategically framed. And sometimes contrast is more consequential than conflict. As the political season advances, moments like this accumulate. They form patterns. Patterns shape perception. Perception shapes history. Years from now, historians may analyze this era as one defined by rhetorical intensity and cultural realignment. They may note how certain statements marked shifts in tone, how leaders adapted messaging to evolving electorates. Whether this particular remark becomes one of those markers remains to be seen. But one thing is certain. In politics, words are never just words. They are signals. They are strategies. They are stakes. And when most people overlook a signal, that's often when it matters most.